Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Here we are, it's March already, Steve. We've just ploughing along. We've got a nice start to autumn. It's, we had a couple of warm days, at least here in Melbourne, but the rain's sort of come through. We'll obviously touch a bit more on the weather in a later topic because we're having some issues on the East Coast. But it's the year's moving along at a rapid clip, one would say.
Well, and it is, and probably like the last 6 years or so, there's an unexpected turn around every corner. So, things are happening. I don't know if we're getting more emotional about our responses to them. You know, is this an effect of social media and blanket media coverage? Is it effect of COVID? Is it effect of Trump before COVID? Who could tell us? I wonder.
One can say, though, it's never a dull moment.
That's very true.
So just wanted to start with the left field, I guess, compared to some of our other topics that we'll talk about later. This story just popped up in my feed one day when I was just watching some YouTube clips about this architecture trend that's dividing London's elites. And it makes sense in that the sense that this space in London is at a premium, so you can't put, you can't build up, you can't build out. So if you've got the money, I guess, and can get the planning approval, you can build underneath, your property. There's, examples of extravagant, basically, for lack of a better term, basements, which that term doesn't exactly conjure up Richville or anything like that. But they were showing in this video, apart from the issues that it was causing, these rather extravagant sort of underground lairs, for lack of a better term, complete with swimming pools and gyms, bars, basically a whole other residence underground. But obviously, it leads to potential issues if not planned properly and not checked properly. And although this particular video was talking about, can't remember his name now. It was it was a musician or something, and he was he recorded. It was a couple of years ago, I think, where he recorded that his privileged basement got flooded, largely because of an issue to do with the surroundings and that sort of thing. But then there's also the fact that, one of I think there was an elite soccer player who was now living in London, retired, had actually said, look, stop approving these things because it might be, giving some pleasure to a couple of people, but it's actually making a nightmare for everyone else because you go down a street and it's just never ending construction while they're excavating and whatnot. I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting story because, like on the one hand, I can see why people would be wanting to do this in London, but at the same time, it seems like there might be a bit more consideration needed in terms of planning approvals and checking whether it's actually suitable to do that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, look, London's an example of a city that, has largely been built over the last 200-300 years, and we're in modern times. I mean, one of the things about London is it's still largely a low-rise city, and the buildings are old, and, obviously, as you've pointed out, space is at a premium. So if you can't go up, you go down. But the other thing about London is it's actually, most people don't know this, built on a series of sort of islands and sort of on a, delta around the Thames, which obviously now we can still see the Thames, but we can't see the bits that they've filled in. So, you start building big lavish basements underground and you're diverting water around your house into other people's places. And, you only have to watch a few episodes of Grand Designs to see there's not much space in London. So if you really want to put in something big and you're going to dig a big hole, you're going to disrupt everyone around you for months on end. People are living closely together. So it's a unique problem. It's a futuristic problem. It might even be a futuristic solution in it, but it's pretty hard because what you're seeing is individuals doing this for themselves and it's not an upgrade of, say, the whole area. So no doubt it's causing problems on a whole range of levels.
I guess that that touches on more globally the idea of planning in cities. Obviously, because that's where I guess the biggest issues are, because you've got less space to deal with, and that there has to be. I guess a level of oversight in the sense that you have to make sure that you're not disrupting the whole area. And like the classic example from my perspective was, and I won't name names in terms of planning ministers, but Melbourne had famously had one that would just basically sign off on everything, and then you had no plan for how, because all these individual companies would build their buildings, but there wasn't actually a plan overriding the whole thing. Which then led to criticism afterwards, that it had to be reined in.
Well, and I think most of us, the general population, would think that that's actually the job of planning, is not to stop you from putting up a shed in your backyard, but to stop people reshaping whole suburbs. I think the other interesting thing about London is it is home to some of the wealthiest people on the planet, and when you've got that much money, if you want to dig a 6-story bunker beneath your house, it's probably unlikely anyone's going to stop you. Certainly not the council planning guy who's probably on 60,000 quid a year.
Money talks, as they say. Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Obviously, I've said before that I don't want to go to the cinema anymore. It's kind of something that's a bit over for me now. But I did chuckle at this next story about exhibitors testing variable pricing with the release of the new Batman film, and I'll touch on the Batman film a little bit at the end of this. But as a joke, that's aside to this. But apparently in America, the AMC Entertainment chain, one of the biggest US exhibition chains, are sort of basically testing like what I would consider to be like almost like theatre show pricing. So depending on where you're so where you're sitting in the actual theatre will determine what price you're paying for that ticket. Now I read it and immediately thought, all right, you've already put me off going. This puts me off even more going, because I don't think I can see why they're doing it, because they're looking for ways to be creative in terms of generating box office revenue, because it's not that they're hurting, because a pandemic aside, they've been making heaps of money and all that sort of thing, but they're obviously seeing a certain level of writing on the wall with pressure coming from streaming services and other entertainment options, that they have to figure out a way to amortize the every seat in a cinema for a big release. But I don't know, people might not care because they still want to go. I have no love for this particular idea, because to me, I never famously went to gold class because I didn't know. I can understand why people wanted the luxury experience, but I didn't see the reason why you would do that just to see a film, because, okay, the seat's a bit nicer, but if I'm at home, I can get my own food. That kind of thing. I'm a bit weird that way, but that was just my take on it.
I don't think there's anything weird about it. I went to gold class a couple of times, and the best thing about it was the reclining chair and the fact, you could drink beer while you watch the film in Australia, which you can't do in cinemas normally, although some cinemas you can these days. Look, it's a good point. I don't like it because I don't complain when I go to a cinema and I come in late and get a crap seat. So why should I have to pay extra, just to get a crap seat, which is effectively what variable pricing does. Yeah. Like that's the key to it. You're actually going to pay a premium for a crap seat, and you're going to pay even more for a better seat. And, I don't know, maybe younger generations today don't mind that, but to me the approach is very obvious. And yeah, it is actually a turn off.
I should also say that from what I've seen, older generations seem to be the ones driving a lot of the return to the cinemas as well, because of I guess the older habits and stuff like that too. Like, it's a real mixture, because I can almost see they might go for that, because they might be conned is probably a harsh word, but the idea that if they pay more, they get a seemingly premium experience.
And look, I understand it. If it's a live performance, whether it's sports or theatre, where you sit matters. In a cinema, wherever you sit, you're going to see the screen. The question is, are you going to be sitting front on, or are you going to be, leave with a sore neck, or be walking left for the next hour after you've been to the film? And the answer is probably not. So, I don't get it. There's no poles in a cinema that, might obscure your view. It's not like a mega stadium where you might be sitting, 55 rows right up the back and they're just ants down on stage, so the premium you're paying, is ridiculous. And I'm not sure what the scale in terms of price differential is, but, geez, it's I can't believe it could be enough to make it worth it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure those crap seats are going for at least $20 a pop. So, I did want to just touch on the new Batman film. I'll check it out once it becomes available for streaming, just in line with my whole thing about not going to the cinema. But I like Batman films. But the thing that occurred to me in the response to this particular outing is that there seems to be this thread of criticism, complaint that, oh, here we go, we've got another dark, tortured Batman. How many times do we have to see it? And I just thought that was interesting, because if anyone can remember the 90s Batman films where it slid back into camp and fun, the biggest complaint there was, why can't we get a definitive dark Batman film? And that's how we want to see him, every time. So they do it. They do the Nolan trilogy and everything, and now this seems to be going along the same route, regardless of whatever the quality is. It's clear that they've taken the same approach, and now it's like, this is not what we want, because they're doing it too authentic to the comic book or something. I just found it bizarre, really.
Oh yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, if you ever remember the original first cinematic Batman, the tough was, it was up against the Adam West very camp TV series, and then the Michael Keaton version sort of sat somewhere in between the super dark and the camp, and then they went more camp, and then they went less camp, and then they went dark, and it just seems to me that maybe what Batman is in the comic is not Batman in film. Never has been really, I think, accurately captured, even though I think there have been some good attempts. But is this just the fans or some fans being dissatisfied? It's hard to know, because all in all, while there have been some real duds, some of the Batmans from right across the era of cinematic Batman have been quite good.
Yep, indeed, and one thing's for sure, they're not going to stop making them. So
that's for sure, and they're probably not going to stop making the very first Batman film over and over again. Or this is how Batman really is. This is the original.
Absolutely. Alrighty, we'll move on. Got I guess more to talk about in terms of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that obviously this story that came out overnight of this nuclear plant attack, and the story that sort of generated from that obviously there's a concern whenever there's I guess explosions going off near a nuclear facility. Ukraine obviously is home to Chernobyl as well, so that there's a history there of how bad things can get if it goes wrong. A misplaced missile could have overnight could have caused a really significant event, which would have been disastrous. But then there's also like we were saying before we got on, the story itself and the media and how it's I guess, driving the narrative of what's going on. Objectively, just like from looking at, okay, if missiles came close to a nuclear plant, that's bad. That's not good at all. But at the same time, with war and everything, maybe Putin was nuts enough to want to go there. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe the narrative would seem to suggest that, because that seems to be where it's going down. But I just think it takes away from the severity of what could have actually happened in this instance.
Look, this is just, if you look past the sheer human cost, which is awful in any war, and this one too, especially because it's unnecessary war, you just see this is just the madness of war. So, I guess 70 years ago there were no nuclear reactors to be caught up in a conflict, and exactly as you've pointed out, all it takes is one error from either side and you've got a huge disaster on top of a disaster. Well, this war is a disaster, and it's a disaster for everyone. The human cost through the war, I think where this will leave Russia as a nation is a disaster. What this will do to the future of Europe is a disaster, because this will take years to unwind the social and political fallout from this conflict. And, if you put a nuclear explosion on that, even if it's a power plant as opposed to nuke weapons, that's a disaster. So, I think this is the sort of thing that leaves us all speechless and horrified at what could easily happen in a conflict like this.
Absolutely. And we've got more good news locally with just moving on with all the rains that are happening down the east coast, and the very severe flooding that's occurring in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, and it's quite that's quite full on as well. The just the images of places where they're floodplains, but the levels of the water are just astonishing, and just having to deal with it, and also that potentially looking at it with the La Nina event that's sort of happening at the moment, that it might not be over quickly. That we might get recurrences of it going along. You would think with most flooding events, they tend to play out where you get the initial deluge and the flooding, etc., and then it subsides. But in this particular instance, it might not actually be as quick as that this time.
No, well, I mean, we're seeing extreme weather events, and they're having extreme consequences. Is this the new norm, or maybe we've just urbanised into areas we shouldn't? But what's happening, I guess once upon a time just would be rain. Now, once again, we need rain in this country quite frequently, but, we end up getting too much of it in this instance, and you get, more troubles and significant disruption. So, and tragedy in it as well. So it's hard to know where all of this is headed.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're thinking about 4 months worth of rain getting dumped in one day in an area, and just how the disruption and human cost attached to it is just kind of mind-boggling, and you have to really think about, again, where is this all going? What can we do about it in terms of that, the whole climate change stuff and all of that, and what actions can be taken? Whether do we have to suffer through these things X amount of times before the penny drops, kind of thing.
Well, I think in a lot of ways it comes back almost to the sort of discussion about London. A lot of the designs or a lot of the ways of coping with these things, even 50 years ago or 60 years ago, you would probably still have the same tragedies in terms of people, having accidents or very serious situations in floodwaters, but the damage bill would be less, the damage to infrastructure, and maybe we're just not our cities just aren't designed well enough to cope with what we're seeing today. And you know, it's not just about building another dam or something like that, but yet it's there's no simple fix. And so yeah, I think we need to start thinking long and hard. You know, maybe along with COVID, this is just the beginning of the death of the super dense city.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. Hopefully, we'll think positive for the future and that it all goes well. But yeah, last few years have been quite challenging, and I guess this year has just thrown a couple of more things on top for us all to feel a little anxious about, really.
I think everyone needs to be as positive as they can and try to find resolutions to whatever they can find a resolution to in their world to make the place a little bit better, because things aren't great at the moment.
Indeed. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. Hope you enjoyed the episode. You can read and watch more science, technology, and culture topics on our website. We've got all of our blogs, RSS feeds, YouTube channels, etc. You can subscribe to there, and hope you like them. And we'll have more and more as we go along. We've been doing it for a while, so and we'll keep doing it and keep checking in with all of these types of topics. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.